Mitch here again with the 1925 Ford Model T. In this video I'm going to be replacing the head gasket on my Model T. The engine over the other side, and I'll show you in a minute, has actually started leaking a bit of water between the cylinder head and the block. Obviously not a good idea, so we're going to be sorting out that problem. Now there was, a very long time ago, the block actually developed a crack in the side. This is before I owned it. And the previous owner actually, I don't know how long ago exactly, but quite some time, repaired the crack in the block. And it's been really good ever since. Now, it looks like it was actually welded properly a long time ago. The crack itself, interestingly enough, wasn't the area that was leaking. It actually turned out that the head gasket had started leaking at the exact same spot as where the crack was in the block. So without further ado, let's get into it, and we'll get this head gasket replaced. Okay, so as you can see, I actually thought that the crack that was in the block was where the water was leaking from, but as we can see, it actually isn't. And you can see the drips of water running where they've been running down the side of the block there from the leaking head gasket. So what we'll do now is we'll get we'll take the head off. We'll have a close look at the condition of the existing head gasket, and then we'll go ahead and put on the new one. Now you can see what I've done here is I've actually covered up the crack, the weld I should say, with some magic metal here, or quick steel as it's alternately called. Although as it turns out I needn't have actually done that, and you can see I only realised afterwards that I'd actually gone over the join between the block and the cylinder head, so we're going to have to just carefully score along there so that when I take the head off I don't go and make a mess of this. So without further ado, let's get stuck into it. We'll get the head off, have a look at the head gasket, and then we'll get the new one installed. Alright, so the first thing we've got to do is take off these spark plug leads. Obviously they're in the way at the moment, so we'll just undo those. Get these leads off. Now it's a good idea to remember, put the thumb screws back on the spark plug so they don't get lost. Believe me, I know from experience that is not fun. It's always nice and fiddly to get to the one at the back. Don't worry. Okay, so that's the spark plug leads off. Alright. Okay, so we've gone ahead and taken off these spark plug leads. Now before we go any further, in order to avoid having a complete mess on our hands, we're going to want to take the water out of the cooling system, because obviously taking the head off, there's water in here at the moment. Excuse me. So what we're going to do is down the bottom, at the bottom of the radiator, we've got our brass stopcock there. We're going to go ahead and drain off all the water, and then we can proceed with disconnecting the top hose. So we'll let the water out now. There we go, now we can see the water coming out, so we'll let that drain off and then we can move on to undoing the top hose. Okay, so now the water's all been drained out, the next step is to disconnect the top hose from the cylinder head. And what I'm going to do here is actually remove, because it'll be a little bit easier, is actually undo the casting from here rather than try and pull the hose off. So I've got my standard Ford wrench here. So what we're going to do is go ahead and undo these guys. I don't think they're that tight. No, very easy to undo. So undo these guys. Okay. And probably just about to see that is actually free from there. Oh, there goes the gasket, wouldn't lose that. That's in good shape, that's good to see. So we'll set that there. Okay, next step we'll take the horn off, because it's obviously attached to one of the bolts here, so the horn has to come off next. see how tight these bolts are. Not too bad at all. Now I won't make you sit here and watch me undo every single one of these bolts. It's a pretty straightforward exercise. So I'll actually speed up that section of the video so you haven't got to sit here and watch me film the whole thing. There are 14 head bolts that have to come out. And I'll just try and get to that one from the other side. So I'd say 14 head bolts that have to come out. And changing my hair. There we go. Oh, they're not too bad. A little bit of a clean up with a wire brush, so we'll be fine. So that's that one off. So we might have to completely remove the horn because the bracket's sitting in the way. So okay, so you can see now I've gone ahead and I've taken the horn off, so that's out of the way. Now all that's left to do is undo all the remaining 13 of these head bolts. So we've already taken one out that was holding the horn in place. So now we've just got the 13 remaining bolts to remove, and then the head will lift off. Okay, let's get the rest of these bolts out. Now undoing them, it doesn't really matter which order you undo them in, it's doing them up that's a bit more critical. Now I could cheat and go ahead and use a modern rattle gun to undo these, but I would hardly be period correct if I did that, so we'll stick with the yeah, some of these bolts do need a clean. Would hardly be period correct to do that, so we'll stick with using the original Ford spanner to do this job. So we'll take them all out one by one with the spanner. Okay, so as you can see, these two ones at the back here, I can't actually lift this one out because of the firewall, but it does lift clear of the cylinder block, so we'll just leave that one loose. Now I've got the final one right at the very back here, which obviously is very difficult to get to. I am going to have to take this spark plug out temporarily in order to be able to access that stud at the rear. So we'll take this one out, take this spark plug out, and we'll set that to one side, and that gives me enough space to get in with the wrench to loosen up this final bolt here, which as it turns out is rather tight. I'm going to try it from the other side. So all the spark plug leads are loose, so it's quite easy to get in under here. Get that on the bolt there and give it a good tug. Let's see if we can get it loose. Yep, there she goes. That's good. Now of course when we put these particular bolts back in, we'll have to sort of sit them in the holes before we put the head back on, because otherwise we're not going to actually be able to get them underneath the firewall. Okay, so the good news, I have been able to get all 14 head bolts out successfully. What I might do is pop that number 4 spark plug back in for now, as the spark plugs, we leave them in, it actually serves a very handy purpose. If you're careful, you can actually use the spark plugs, once you've loosened the head of course, which it is now loose, just the act of tightening that plug did it, you can use the spark plugs to help you lift the head off. So let's see how we go. The spark plug leads shouldn't present a problem. In fact, we might just tuck them behind these wires up here for now to get them out of the way. Probably should have done this before, but never mind. I'll just tuck these wires out of the way so you can see clearly what I'm doing. Get that one up there. There we go. Now we should be able to get the head off without any problems at all. So wish me luck, and let's see how it goes. Okay, so what we might do is we might take it off from the other side because the manifold's in the way that side. And we'll see how it goes. Okay, so those bolts. Make sure those bolts are loose. Okay, and she's coming away nicely, and there's one cylinder head off. Oh, there we go. Okay, so as you can see, there's the copper gasket that was in there. Okay, so taking a closer look at the cylinder head, my apologies, the top of the block here, we can see that it's actually been stitched here before. I wasn't actually aware of all the repairs that have been done. So yeah, it's been stitched here. On top of the cylinder, there seems to be some build-up of rubbish on top of here, particularly where the gasket is supposed to be seated. So it looks like whoever did this before didn't actually clean off the top of the block before they put the gasket on. So I'm actually amazed it hasn't leaked before that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to get a scraper and we'll go ahead and we'll give the top of the block a good clean before we put the new gasket on. Alright, so I've got the tools here to go ahead and clean up the top of the block here. I'm going to gently go over it with a wire brush first, just to loosen up any particles that are on the surface, anything that shouldn't be here where the gasket is intended to sit. Now don't worry about any bits of metal falling down into the cylinders, as I'm sure you can see. We're going to go ahead and blow those out with a compressor afterwards, because this wire brush is just about on its last legs. So we're just going around the edge and between the cylinders just to remove any loose particles. Quite get the brush into that one. There we go. Just removing any loose particles on top of the cylinder, on top of the cylinders here on the block. I'm paying close attention to here where we had the little bit of an issue with the leak here. And that's nice and smooth now. Paying close attention between the cylinders, of course. We want to be keeping the water well out of there. So that's the wire brushing done, and just going over with the scraper on the back of the wire brush here, removing any other loose deposits here. Making sure that the surface is smooth afterwards. Okay, so what we have here, we're looking at the underside of the cylinder head, and as you can see, it's not in too bad condition. Just needs a bit of a scrape, a bit of a rough up and clean up. You can see that all the ports here, none of these are blocked up, which is good to see. And there's no pitting or anything like that in it, which is never a good sign. But no, she's looking good. So I'll go ahead and give this a quick clean up. It's not in too bad a shape, as I said. And then we'll be able to go ahead and put the new gasket on with the appropriate adhesive, and then we'll put the cylinder head back on. Alrighty, now I don't know if you can quite see in this picture here, but there's been a build-up of carbon on the tops of each of the pistons. So while we've got the head off, we're taking the opportunity to go over it with the wire brush. Now we've already cleaned up around the surface for the gasket there. We'll go over it with the wire brush and clean up each of the pistons in turn, to make sure that they're nice and clean, ready for when we put everything back together. And I've already started to wire brush these down. There was quite a thick build-up of carbon on the top, which of course wouldn't be helping with engine performance. So we'll just go ahead and we'll give these a good scrub. I'll send those two pistons down. We'll bring the other two up, and we'll just stop them at top dead center, just like that. And you can see I've already gone ahead and started to rough these ones up in the clean. So we'll just wind those other pistons up again, just to make sure we clean all of the rubbish out of the cylinders. Because obviously we don't want any dirt in the cylinders when we go to start the engine again. We've just got a rag here put some thinners on it, and we'll just go inside each piston, each cylinder, give them a good clean, make sure there's no residue, any dirt left inside them. The same with this one. I'll just feel in there with my hand just to make sure I can't feel any dirt or anything inside that cylinder. Okay, so now we've gone ahead and we've got the top of the block nice and clean and free from any rubbish or any carbon or anything like that shouldn't be there. And I've done the same to the underside of the cylinder head. The next step, of course, is to go ahead and install the brand shiny new head gasket. Now, we don't just put the gasket itself straight onto the motor and then put the head on. We've got to use a gasket sealer or adhesive for this purpose, and I'll just show you what I've got for that. So what we've actually got for the job is this stuff here. It's a copper gasket cement, which is specifically for use in this application. So it says on here it's for cork paper and metal gaskets. Seals gaskets, hoses and fittings, excellent adhesion under pressure and heat fluctuations. So this is the product that I've been recommended to use here. Okay, now before we go ahead and spray the adhesive on and put this head gasket into position, I will point out it does actually matter which way up the gasket goes. Now, just on the face of it, just looking at it, it might not look like it does, but yeah, there is actually a difference. And the easiest way to spot it is at the ends of the gasket. So this end here on the right hand side here goes to the front of the engine. You'll notice this section here is thinner than this section here. So the rear wall of the engine is actually thicker than the front. So that tells us which way up it goes. Now, if I just put that in, put that into position, this is the correct way up, like this, and we get all the holes lined up, and we can see that the head gasket finishes flush with the front of the engine there. I don't know if you can quite see that in the picture, but what I can see here is that I'll actually move the camera so you can see. So just a quick look here. We can see that with the gasket the correct way up, the gasket actually finishes flush with the front of the engine. However, if I go ahead and put the gasket up the other way, the wrong way up, the telltale sign will be that first of all the gasket doesn't really appear to sit properly, but you can also see that it overhangs the front of the block at the front. So that's how you tell which way up to put the gasket. And the other way to tell with a Model T gasket is the where the copper is folded over should be on top and visible when you put the gasket on. But yeah, just in case you're wondering which way up it does go, it does matter, mostly because of the size and the shape. So the skinny end goes to the front, or alternately just look where the copper moulding is folded over on the top of the gasket. That goes on the top. Okay, so now the can's been given a thorough shaking. The instructions tell us to spray on a thin coat, just enough to evenly cover the surface on both sides of the gasket. So we'll give that a spray over now. So we'll start off, it doesn't matter which side we start on. We'll just give it a nice even coating. So that's an adequate coating on that one. A bit more there. Making sure that the whole thing is covered. And now we turn it over. You can see what I've done here is I've just sat the gasket on some metal just to elevate it so it doesn't stick to our cardboard backing here. And our instructions tell us to leave it for about 5 minutes or so, or until it starts to go tacky, and then we can put it straight onto the top of the engine block. And now we just let that sit for about 5 minutes or so, and then we apply the gasket straight onto the block. So just while we're waiting for that gasket sealer to go tacky for us, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop the pistons down so they don't get in the way while we're trying to line up the gasket. So we'll just get like so. And we're just about ready, I think, to put the gasket into position. So our gasket's ready to go on. The gasket sealing solution has gone tacky. So what we'll actually do now is go ahead, put that straight into position on top of the block like so. And get it nice and straight. And now comes the slightly challenging bit, is actually putting the cylinder head back into position and getting that all straight and true. Okay, now a little secret here. In order to get this to go in properly, what I've done is I've gone ahead and put in the first two bolts, which I'll need to line up with these two holes at the rear of the block. They have to go in first, otherwise you won't get them in past the firewall here. Now I have a touring car here, which might be slightly different to yours, but just bear that in mind. If your block is quite close to your firewall, you might find it difficult to get these guys in if you leave them until afterwards. So they have to go in first, and then we can line up the head and get the other ones in. So I'll come around the other side of the car, and we'll get this head back into its place. Now comes the slightly fiddly bit here, guiding the cylinder head into position, so that we can get those bolts into position. I'll say it can be a little bit fiddly, but once you get it in, it's fine. I'll say that the bolts must be in position before we put everything back together. Now, I think I've got those lined up nicely. Now what we're going to do, we're not actually going to put these bolts in all the way just yet, because there is a very specific order in which you have to do these guys up, which I will now show you. This is the order of tightening the cylinder head bolts on your Model T. So obviously starting with the very middle and then essentially working your way outwards from there. The idea is so that you get an even spread of pressure when you're doing them up. So this is the plan we'll follow. So now we'll start putting the head bolts back in. I'll just put them all in no particular order initially, but then I'll show you how we go about tightening them up properly. Okay, so you can see I've already got the, you might not be able to quite see it in the picture, but I've got the back ones in. As I mentioned, we had to put those guys in first. But now, in no particular order, we just go ahead and we put these guys in and make sure we've got the holes lined up. There we go. Okay, now the tool we're going to be using to do up these head bolts to their final tightness is this little guy here, known as a torque wrench. Now this particular one is calibrated in the metric system of Newton meters, but obviously this car being American, you guys probably want to know the imperial measurement for that. So basically what we're going to be starting with is a torque setting of 35 foot-pounds, which is about 47 Newton meters, and that's for our first tightening. And then after that's had a chance to bed in, what we'll do, we'll tighten that up to that setting, and then we'll go ahead and we'll tighten it up to its final torque setting of 45 pounds-feet, which is about 61 Newton meters. So this one's really easy to set. You simply slacken this little guy off at the back, and the first setting we want is your 35 pounds-feet or 47 Newton meters. So we find what's the closest setting to that, which is what do we got? We want a Newton meters, don't we? So we need to go 47 Newton meters. So the closest setting to that is 42. So we'll wind it up to 42, and then we follow this graduated scale on here. So 42, what do we want? 44, 46, 47, and then we lock this guy off at the bottom, and now we're ready to start tightening. So all we do, and we start off on the center one here, and we keep going until the torque wrench gives us a click to indicate that it is actually reached the torque setting that we want. Now this particular torque wrench will let you keep tightening beyond the click, but seeing as we're after a specific torque setting, we actually stop when it gives us that click. Now if you listen carefully, there's the click there, and that's our 35 pounds-feet, or 47 Newton-meters. Now we're just going to go ahead and do the exact same thing on all of the bolts in sequence until we've got them all to the same torque setting. Okay, now you may have noticed that one bolt is actually missing, and you're spot on. It's actually the one that holds the horn on. So we've actually gone ahead and we've gone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and number 6 is this one over here. So we've got to go ahead first and pop the horn back on before we can go to the next step. So here's the horn here, which is upside down. We'll just undo this bolt here on the side of the water jacket there. And we'll make sure we get that nice and straight on there. And that one's up to the right torque setting. And finally, number 15. Now, you may or may not have realised, if you've been paying attention, that I actually miscounted the number of head bolts. There are in fact 15 of them, and I initially told you 14, so I do apologise for that. Number 15 is hiding up the back there, and I'll get that one done and then I'll show you what to do next. Okay, so the the gasket seal has had a chance of bedding in. So what I've already gone ahead and done is re-torqued all these bolts up to the 45 pounds-feet torque setting. So now what we need to do is put the water back in the radiator and start the engine, let it run until it gets hot, and then go ahead and just quickly go over each bolt after the engine cools down again and re-torque them, just to make sure that they all are actually bedded in and tight and properly done up. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and put the water back in and we'll get the engine started, and then that's pretty much it for this video. Okay, so we've got the engine all back together. We've put the water back in the radiator, and I'm pleased to say, after having a good look around, there are no leaks whatsoever, which is excellent. So what we'll do now is we'll go ahead and get the engine started, let it warm up, and make sure that it continues to be leak-free. And then once the engine has gotten hot, then after that we allow it to cool down, re-torque all the bolts just to make sure that they haven't come loose at all, and then that's job done. So what I'll do, I'll leave you now. So once again, and as always, thank you very much for watching the video. Don't forget to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And I'll say goodbye for now, and I'll leave you with the final stages of the head gasket change procedure, which is running the engine up to temperature and retorquing the bolts. So thanks again for watching, guys. Okay, so now we'll just go over these bolts, and we can see that they are nice and tight. That's excellent. Okay, job done. much job done, and another little upshot I've noticed. The problem was previously worse than I thought. We've actually got better compression now, which is excellent. So, yep, that's job done, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye, guys.